There are many religious bodies out there, all sorts, all colors, traditions, creeds, statements of faith, shrines, if you will, everything you could possibly want in religious affair, worldview. Some create a new religious branch every other day. There is no lack of such things within the human mind to find religious affair. There is, of course, out there various religious worldviews that would fall within the isms that we can identify, right? You have perhaps Islam, you have Buddhism, and you have Hinduism, and various forms of other isms, I suppose. One can go into the heathenism or hedonism, um, but it's out there and it's quite popular in a great many ways. It wasn't at a time so much so popular in the Western culture. We were more of the Christian principled religious worldview and the isms of Catholicism or Protestantism. And not so much now, of course, now that we are multicultural and apparently diversity is our strength and things of that kind. We've been flooding in, if you will, the acceptance, welcoming the acceptance of foreign religious worldviews, and it is now enamored in Western culture. You'd be hard pressed, I suppose, to find a true gem of Christian principle in a nationwide prospect. To that end, anyways, I think over in America, our dear friends over there in the new voted administration is trying to reignite the more Christian value or Christian tradition, if you will. I don't know if they will be successful with that or not. But over here in Canada, we have many locations with various isms that are not, formulated in Christendom, if you will, or anything like that. Hinduism is a very powerful religious worldview now, and it's strongly received and practiced. Um, what is it now? Is it 1.2 billion or something like that? I just made a quick Google search, and it said something, I think, along the lines of it's either 2.1 billion or 1.2 billion. I forget, but billions of people associate with Hinduism. So that's kind of what we're going to be looking at today. The origins of Hinduism. Where does it come from? Why is it here? And yeah, we'll open up an article from our friends over at apologeticpress.org and read an article in regards to the origins of Hinduism. And we'll share some thoughts and experience, perhaps, in conversation along our journey reading the article. We have now in the Western world, if you will, America and Canada. Canada has um, set forth and built these massive Hindu gods. I can't remember the location now, but we have this like massive Hindu god and things like that. It's quite, again, it's very popular over here in on the East Coast. It's a very strong and growing culture, Hinduism. They, have the Colosseum to go to. They're very rapidly growing, and many of them practice that, and they come from various locations of the world who have come to our shores. Some of them mostly from India, I suppose, that are strong with Hinduism and stuff like that. So, I think it's a valuable conversation and session to have to kind of know a bit about Hinduism, since it's taken over our culture over here, no doubt. It's part of it. Islam and Hinduism seem to be now a very strong and dominant religious worldview in our fallen nation. And it's wise, I suppose, for some of us to kind of understand what it's all about, where it comes from. In my experience, those who I've spoken to who are Hindus are kind. They seem to be peaceful people. We have friends that have visited and visit with us and study with us who come from a Hindu background. Some of them still practice or believe in the Hindu gods and the Hindu practices and whatnot. And they're very kind. I've had no problem that way. I've been told by some of them, though, that there are some violent branches of Hinduism, if you will, in certain pockets of the world, and I have no doubt there is. But from my experience and our experience, most of the individuals we've spoken to who have visited or constantly continuously visiting and studying with us or whatnot, been kind people, very loving, peaceful. Some of them very morally upright, like they understand the moral codes. So it's interesting. It's an interesting thing to look at, and I think it would be, beneficial for some of us who deal with those things. Now, maybe you don't, because if you live in a certain pocket of the Western world, America or Canada, where it's still that rural farming, Christian value or Christian principles, you probably, don't really talk about Hinduism. You may be aware of it or whatever, but it's not in your peripheral. It's not anywhere in your entourage or your neighborhood or community or anything like that. But for some of us, of course, closer to the cities are always the first place to kind of take in all these different religious views. And Islam is a very strong one as well. Obviously, Islam has taken much territorial conquest and conquer on our soil here for Islamic religion purposes. And I have studied Islam. I wouldn't say I'm some kind of scholar with it or anything, but I've studied it enough to know why they do what they do and where it comes from and so on and so forth. But Hinduism, I'm not well versed with Hinduism. I'm quite interested in Hinduism. I have a surface understanding of it, enough, I suppose, to defend myself in certain ways, but I find it quite interesting. Interesting why people would believe in Hinduism or the Hindu gods or whatever. And so I want to learn a bit more about it. And I figured take you on the journey as we read this article. And over at apologeticspress.org, they are, of course, a trustworthy platform. I've been reading their material for many, many years. And they seem to be quite solid and sound. They send you to the Bible. They look at the history of things. They look at the science of things. And they formulate a well-rounded position. And so, I go to their source when I have the opportunity to do so. And if you want to check it out on your own time, read the article on yourself. It's over at apologeticspress.org. And we're going to put that up on the screen. We'll read together as we've been doing. Friends, listen, if you're new here, my name is Stéphane Maillet. Yeah, that's a French name. And I speak English words. I speak 3 languages, actually. French and English and Chiac, what we call over here, Chiac. No, it's not a bad word. It's not a cuss word or anything. It's truly just how it's described. But we'll put it up on the screen, and I want you to. Oh yeah, hey, listen. AddedSouls.com is my website. If you want to check that out, I labor alongside. I work with the East Coast Church of Christ over here on the East Coast of Canada, and I'd love for you to check out the .com or .ca. Same thing. East Coast Church of Christ.ca. We'd love to have you. If you want to come study with us, it'd be a blessing on us to have you. It'd be an honor, truly. Reach out to us. Okay? So let me put the article here up on the screen. There we go. All right. And as you can see there on the screen, please consider subscribing, following, liking, sharing, drop a comment, engage, right? That kind of stuff helps us to reach others out there, and maybe someone would find benefit. Maybe someone's seeking to know a bit more about Hinduism and what it's all about. I want to. And I'm a Christian. And that's okay. I think more Christians should learn about stuff like this so we can be approachable. We can talk to people. For me, it's wise to know more about Hinduism because, again, our culture has now changed. It's no longer the same culture I grew up in. Now the culture is Hinduism and Buddhism and Islam and stuff like that. So I want to know about that. So we're going to read about that. Over at Apologetics Press, the article title says, The Ancient Origins of Hinduism. The Ancient Origins of Hinduism. Friends, it's good to see all of you tapping in, Jackie, Anik, Brandon, Carolyn, Barbara, and all our dear friends that tune in, and all of you who are visiting for the first time with us here. Stick around. Stick around. Sometimes it's a bit tedious, but we're learning stuff. And learning stuff is a good thing. So the article starts and it says, The word Hindu originated not as the name of a religion, but as a geographical marker. Hmm. I'm already learning something. I didn't know that. You know that? I didn't know that. Hindu derives from Sanskrit word for river. Well, isn't that something? Sindhu, from which the Indus River received its name. Well, that's fascinating. I wonder if even people who are Hindus know this kind of stuff. Maybe many of them probably don't. If I've learned something in my religious journey since June 26, 2011, most people who adhere to a religious worldview, I speak of Christianity as well, by the way, those who claim to be Christians. Most folks in religious participation or affiliation, many of them, maybe not most, maybe many, several, really don't know their doctrines or their teachings too well, or their origins, where they come from, who began their religious worldview or whatever. I've recognized that, which is why, of course, I chose to be educated in the religious world, and I went to America to be educated for 4 years and learn everything that I could about all sorts of religions, and I continue to do so. I began doing so in 2011, wanting to know what's Christianity all about again, and why should we believe in Jesus or follow Jesus and stuff like that. So it's interesting. I've sat down with many people, hundreds and hundreds of people who adhere to all sorts of religious views, and many of them, the majority of them, there we go, really don't know the origin of their beliefs. And they just follow it through tradition. It could have been something like, well, I wanted to feel spiritual in one way or another, or this is the religion mom and dad gave me, or something along those lines. But yeah. Pure Christianity, by the way, it calls us to be educated. It's an educated religion. So it's important for us to know why we believe in Jesus and where Jesus comes from and the Bible and stuff like that. Have to be able to defend what we believe in, right? So Hinduism. Okay. So come to find out, the word Hindu didn't begin as a religious description or anything. Came as some kind of a river, right? Sanskrit word for river, Sindhu, from which the Indus River received its name. Sometime in the first millennium BC, the Persians, who were then South Asia's closest neighbors, mispronounced Sindhu and designated the land around the Indus River as Hindu. Maybe that already gives us insight regarding Hinduism and water and the rivers and stuff. Over 1,000 years later, in AD 712, the Muslims invaded the Indus Valley. To distinguish themselves, they called all non-Muslims Hindus. The name of the land became, by default, the name of the people and their religion. Well, now that's quite fascinating. And I do hope many Hindu people listen to this session. I hope they're not offended. And if so, please don't. It's not. Sometimes I don't deliver the message maybe as well as I should. So please, I'm just reading information from the origins of Hinduism that come probably from the mouth of Hindu scholars. Apologetics Press is very good at that. They are very, they do diligent to their studies and find a religious belief that origins from the belief system itself, if you will. In other words, if you want to know about Islam, go ask Islamists, go ask their scholars, go ask their books, to go ask their origins. Well, it's the same thing with Hinduism. If you want to know about Hinduism, go to the source, ask their scholars, ask their literature, ask their, where they come from and stuff like that. So it's quite interesting, and I do hope and pray many Hindus will find this session and perhaps learn a bit more about where they come from or why they believe what they believe. So here, the information leads to pointing to that Islam and the Muslims are actually the ones that call them Hindus, kind of coined the term Hindu. To distinguish themselves, they called all non-Muslims Hindus. The name of the land became, by default, the name of the people and their religion. Christians, upon entering Hindustan, as it was then called, Hindustan, committed the same error of reduction. From their perspective, the indigenous people were all idol-worshipping pagans, so they christened the Indians Gentoo, a derogatory synchronization of, quote, Gentile and Hindu. Ah. Hmm. Thus, the name Hindu originally was given by outsiders to denote a geographic territory, but through the encroachment of various other religious groups, it came to encompass all native religions in Southeast Asia. Well, and that's something. That's fascinating to me. I didn't know this stuff. Again, I don't know much about Hinduism other than, a few humorous things. I remember watching The Simpsons in one episode there, Homer's tripping out on Hinduism somehow, Vishnu and the gods. Right? It's been so long, but stuff like that. Like, that's the only thing I've ever known about Hinduism until, again, I started to study a bit further, and it started to become a reality in our culture. As the history of its name demonstrates, unity in India, in Indian religion, has been superimposed by outsiders. First by the Muslims, then the Christians, and much later by the British colonialists who, through their census, unintentionally reefed the South Asian peoples under that banner. So it has only been in the last couple of centuries that the Indian people have embraced the name Hindu as their own. Though two Indians rarely use the word with the same meaning. Some scholars suggest that it is more appropriate to speak of Hinduisms than to risk giving off a false sense of unity. So it's not kind of like this one thing where it's like Hinduism, but it's more along the line of Hinduisms. And that's kind of similar, if you will, to Islam in one respect, because you have various branch of thought or belief systems and I suppose practices in Islam, because you have Islam in its pure religious way through Muhammad and the Quran, but there are various branches of it, if you will. So it's interesting, yeah. The genesis of Hinduism is nearly as elusive as its contemporary definition, it says. Unlike Islam, which began with Muhammad, or Judaism, which began with Moses, Hinduism has no founder, nor any traditional time or place of origin. Well, that's kind of just came to be. It emerges from the jungle as a continually evolving religious system. Scholars debate the primary source of what would become the Hindu religion, though all agree that several cultures had an influence. Basham, Whitman, and Doniger suggest that ancient Hinduism evolved from at least three antecedents. Quote, an early element common to most of the Indo-European tribes, a later element held in common with the early Iranians, and an element acquired in the Indian subcontinent itself. The oldest of these influences are the symbols and deities indigenous to the Indus Valley, part of the ancient and abstruse Dravidian culture. Archaeologists date this magnificent society to the 3rd millennium BC, making it one of the oldest known civilizations. This early date also places the religion of the Indus over 1,000 years before the writing of the Old Testament, in the time of the patriarchal age. If the archaeologists' dating is correct, the Indus civilization was established soon after the Tower of Babel incident. Wow, that's going back, isn't it? The archaeological sites along the Indus have revealed many terracotta figures resembling gods and goddesses in the Vedic literature. I'm probably butchering the pronunciation of all these things, but I'm doing my best here. The Vedic literature, some of which are still worshipped. Though religious figurines abound, temples inexplicably are absent from the Indus cities. So you can find kind of the little statues or whatnot, but not the location itself, the temple. Because the Indus Valley script has yet to be deciphered, much of the Dravidian culture, and religion remains a mystery. So the Christian must ask how the Hindu religion fits into the biblical narrative. Islam grew out of Judaism and Christianity, and Buddhism derived from Hinduism. So Buddhism is kind of like an offshoot splinter of Hinduism. Interesting. Hinduism is the only major religion lacking an adequate explanation as to its origin. No substantial texts exist beyond 1000 BC, and the texts after 1000 BC do not contain narrative. The earliest of these is the Rig Veda, which is nothing but a collection of praise hymns to the gods rather than the record of a people as in the Bible. Unlike Western cultures, which tend to view time as a linear progression, the Eastern religions generally reckon time to be cyclical. As a result, they emphasize the eternal over the transient and historical. Scholars are able to piece together the earliest Indian religion only through archaeology, clues in the later texts, and by extrapolating from existing traditions. Using these same resources, the article continues, Christian scholars can reiterate or reinterpret the available data so that the Hindu religion fits into a biblical scheme of world history. Reconstructing the ancient history of any civilization is tentative. However, and all such projects are educated speculations at best. Bible believers would expect all civilizations to postdate the universal flood, which destroyed every human save the family of Noah. This recorded, of course, in Genesis chapter 7. Now the peoples that sprang from Noah's sons then spread over the earth, though the Bible is silent as to when and how. Though it is possible that some colonies were established, the text indicates that most of the people stayed together in the land of Shinar, Genesis 11:2, where they began construction on that fateful tower. Now the hubris of Noah's descendants kindled the wrath of God, who, after he had confused their languages, quote, he scattered them abroad over the face of all the earth, Genesis 11:9. Josephus wrote that, quote, each colony took possession of that land which they lighted upon and unto which God led them, so that the whole continent was filled with them, both the inland and maritime countries. This from the Antiquities. From this point, the Old Testament records the history of the children of Abraham. The events of the rest of the world can be known only through secular history. We must try to trace the origin of Hinduism back to an original belief in the true God, a belief passed down from the progeny of Noah. In a passage particularly descriptive of the Indian religion, Paul argues that the ancient Gentiles knew God, but they did not, quote, retain their knowledge of God. Instead, changing, quote, the glory of the incorruptible God into an image made like corruptible man, birds and four-footed animals and creeping things. You can read this in Romans chapter 1, verse 28 and verse 23, right? Evidence for the historical digression from the worship of Jehovah God to the worship of nature and nature gods is found in the ancient texts and myths of South Asia. The earliest Hindu literature, the Rig Veda, speaks often of, quote, the creator, of, quote, the one, a great god over all the other gods, it seems. He is called Varuna and is closely related to the Zoroastrian god Ahura Mazda, wise lord. Hey, Mazda, there we go. I used to drive a Mazda. And the Greek god Uranus, Urania, or Urania. Though an insignificant sea god in the current pantheon, Varuna was a prominent god in the ancient system and the subject of many hymns in the Rig Veda. Zwemer writes that Varuna is, quote, the most impressive of the Vedic gods. He is the prehistoric sky god whose nature and attributes point to a very early monotheistic conception. Interesting. This God is an ethical God, capable of great wrath or merciful forgiveness of sins. Note this passage from the Vedas. I do not wish King Varuna to go down to the home of clay. Be gracious, mighty Lord, and spare whatever wrong we men commit against the race of heavenly ones, O Varuna. Whatever law of thine we here have broken through thoughtfulness, for that transgression do not punish us, O God. That's interesting. Varuna is already on the decline by the time the Vedas were committed to writing. Indra, a warrior god, takes prominence in the latter Vedic period. Yet even then, Varuna is qualitatively different from Indra and all the other gods that follow him in the Vedic literature. He is less anthropomorphic and more majestic, if you will. Other Hindu deities act like humans in the same way as the Greek gods, yet Varuna is above that. It would seem that this god embodies many of the qualities of Jehovah, albeit diluted and removed by many hundreds of miles and years. So the myths of ancient Hinduism likewise contain echoes of the distant past similar of Genesis. There are several different, though not exclusive, creation myths in the Vedas, and even more in the later literature. But in one of the earliest writings, Indra is the maker of all. Quote, who made firm the shaking earth, who brought to rest the mountains when they were disturbed, who measured out the wide atmosphere, who fixed the heaven. He, O folk, is Indra. So this version of creation by a personal god, lowercase g, is more similar to the Old Testament account than the later Hindu formulations. Hammer remarks, quote, in the early creation myth, Indra was seen as the personal agent in creation, bringing existence out of non-existence. In later speculation, the one god, described in personal terms, gives way to that one, the impersonal force of creation. As time passed and the true God was forgotten, the creation myths became more fantastic, if you will, involving giant snakes and four-mouthed gods growing out of lotus flowers, so on and so forth. In addition to the creation myths, a story persists in the epic tradition, written between 300 BC to AD 300, of a great flood. And this is quite interesting to me. I find this interesting. How, again, all kinds of ancient civilizations had a form of communication involving the flood that took place during the age of Noah. It was so great that, quote, there was water everywhere, and the waters covered the heaven and the firmament also. This from the Mahabharata. The hero of the story is Manu, of course, who is analogous to Noah in the Hebrew story. Like, in other words, where did they come up with this kind of stuff? Well, they came from it from that ancient time and history and the scriptures, of course, regarding that moment where the earth was completely overcome by flood, by water. One day a fish approached Manu and asked him for protection in exchange for a blessing. Later tradition identifies the fish as the god Vishnu. See where all these names come from? Manu helped the fish, who gives him this warning. The time for the purging of this world is now ripe. Therefore, do I now explain what is good for thee. The mobile and immobile divisions of the creation. Those that have the power of locomotion, and those that have it not. All these the terrible doom hath now approached. Thou shalt build a strong, massive ark, and have it furnished with a long rope. On that must thou ascend, O great Muni, with the 7 rishis, and take with thee all the different seeds which were enumerated by regenerate brahmanas in days of yore, and separately and carefully must thou preserve them therein. This from the Mahabharata. So Manu alone survived the Great Flood in their account, and from him the world was repopulated. The connection between the Hindu story and the Genesis account is strengthened by etymological ties between the name Noah and Manu. The evidence from India's earliest literature traditions reveals that Hinduism is a corruption of true religion. Though for most of its existence, Hinduism has been an extremely pluralistic religion, being influenced by several cultures originally, and later by surrounding religions, Islam, Buddhism, and Christianity. It appears to have grown out of monotheism, if you will. The renowned Sankritist of Oxford, Max Muller, wrote, quote, "There is a monotheism that precedes the polytheism of the Veda." And those words simply mean one or many. Monotheistic, one, as you could figure it out, I'm sure. Polytheism, many. Okay? That's all that means. So there is a monotheism that precedes the polytheism of the Veda. In other words, Hinduism and its origin seem to have gathered their religious belief from a one God, which came, of course, from Jehovah. So they kind of looked at that model and said, let's create our own, if you will. I don't know. We'll talk a bit more about that after we read this. But there is a monotheism that precedes the polytheism of the Veda. And even in the invocations of the innumerable gods, the remembrance of a God, one and infinite, breaks through the mist of idolatrous phraseology like the blue sky that is hidden by passing clouds. So that concludes the article here over with our friends at apologeticspress.org, and it's titled, what's it titled now? The Origins, I believe? Yeah, The Ancient Origins of Hinduism. The Ancient Origins of Hinduism. It's interesting to me because, again, I've just learned a bunch of stuff in a few minutes. I mean, we've just been going for a half hour here, but it's interesting how Hinduism, or the title Hindu, didn't come from a founder of sorts, like you would have the founder of a certain religious view, like Muhammad for Islam, if you will. Buddhism came from Hinduism, kind of a splinter and a shot, but Hindu came from a derogatory term, or it began with naming a certain river from foreigners entering in, Islam entering in, and the river. And those who were not Islamists, they were called Hindu because it was a misguided interpretation of the name of the river. It's quite interesting. It's quite fascinating insight. But it also, sadly, gives insight to the fact that man will create and practice all sorts of religious worldview or religious tradition that just comes from all sorts of really nothing, in essence, like just came to be and we ran with it, which is, of course, very different than the pure view of Christianity and its tangible evidence. But so Hinduism came to be accepted, and it came from a monotheistic thought, a one God, and throughout time it kind of came to this pluralistic, polytheistic practice. And now, I mean, if you ask Hinduism, they got all sorts of gods. There's a god for everything, which is kind of makes me think of Paul on Mars Hill. Right? Was it there? No, not Mars Hill, sorry. Where did he go? Yeah, maybe it was there. You know, there's so many gods that he wants to talk about the unknown God. You know, let me talk to you about, they had so many gods, they had one they called the unknown God. And Paul's like, let me tell you about the unknown God. Because it so happens that the unknown God to you is the real God, the one true living God. So Hinduism, yeah, it's interesting. And they speak, of course, and over here in our city here, they have their culture, practice, and they have a very vibrant and flourishing culture with them. But ultimately, in reality, like in an honorable court of law, let's say, it's just a belief in all sorts of things, all sorts of gods they've made up. There's no true origin to it as per like a founder is just kind of a mishmash that came about from outsiders, and they kind of just put it all in together, which has typically been the religious worldview of everyone who has departed the true and pure Christian reality. That's kind of been my experience studying religion and seeing how we came to be enamored with all kinds of different religious worldviews. Christ, of course, came to pierce the people into a pure form of religious rite, which is the Christ. But from there, some have created their own form of Christianity. That's why, even if you look at all these different branches, if you look at, like we look at Hinduism, Islam, Buddhism, well, Christianity, in the umbrella of Christendom, if you will, is enamored in denominationalism. And denominationalism is just people creating Christianity in their own image. That's all it is. Some of them may be doing so maliciously, some of them just ignorantly, I suppose, which is why some of us, of course, have been disenfranchised by that, and we just chose to go back to the pure form of Christianity we can read of in the New Testament Bible. But many people are swimming in an ocean of religion they so-call Christianity, but it's Christianity created in the image of men. And I suppose it's the same when it comes to Islam or Buddhism and Hinduism. Each one of them just creates their own formula to it. They may have common ground in various things, but they go about it whichever way their ambition brings them or their desire seeks. And that's kind of how it functions. Again, my experience with Hindu individuals, has been positive. It's not been negative. I've not been in contact with those who are Hindus or practicing Hindus to be violent, though they themselves have told me there are violent branches of Hindus in their homeland or wherever they come from. But as far as the people that I've been able to speak with in the community and who have visited us and whatnot, they're very kind people, very confused because they were perhaps born and raised in the confusion of the Hindu religion, which is, again, more so like all religions, I suppose, driven by emotion, more so feeling, and how should I say, superstition and feeling, myth, fantasy, enchantment and charm, sensational with it. That's kind of how every single religious worldview outside of pure Christianity is founded and grounded in how they operate. It's the same with denominationalism. It's just a feeling to a tradition or something like that. So that's kind of, what most people walking this earth are guided by. And many of us, prior to our conversion to pure Christianity, doing the same thing. There's not many differences, if you will, from, let's say, Catholicism and Hinduism. There isn't. Catholicism is Hinduism, and Hinduism is kind of Catholicism. They just call themselves differently. But they are so very similar. And of course, we understand that from the origins of Catholicism that came about from a Roman socio-political power and policy coming together with Judaism, heathenism, and various characteristics of Christianity, if you will, or various tenets of Christianity, and they mishmashed it all together in one bowl like a salad, and they made it universal, which is what Catholic means, universal. And this, of course, happened centuries and centuries after the fact. What fact? That Christ had already established his pure church, kingdom. So Catholicism was a branch, if you will, or was a branch away from that, if you will. Catholicism is a departure and a division, a departure from pure Christianity. Now, I know that's quite offensive to those who are firmly convinced that Catholicism is Christianity, but it isn't. It just isn't, factually speaking. If you take the feelings away from it, factually speaking. And you look at the many idolatrous ways of Catholicism, though again, they will say, no, that's not true, but it is, factually. If you, again, get rid of the feelings part of it, it factually is. I was born and raised in Catholicism. I have firsthand experience with it. I know it is idolatrous. Statues and beads and all kinds of rituals and stuff like that. It's very Hindu, or Hindu is very Catholic. And most religious worldviews are along those lines, in all respects. Now, of course, the true and pure Christ of the Scriptures calls us away from that, to set us free from the bondage of all those deceptions. And some of us, a very small remnant of humankind, chooses through our free will to do so. I was one of those individuals who said, what do I have to lose to learn this? I want to learn the pure Christ. I want to learn the Christ of the New Testament system. I no longer want to be, going to third-party, fourth-party agendas to try to tell me how I should interpret this or that. I just want to learn for myself, and that's what I did. And, of course, the more you learn for yourself, the more that you're called out from all these religious worldviews, including denominationalism within the quote-unquote Christendom. It's a beautiful thing because you're set free and you see the truth of it, and it's a blessing, no doubt, to be forgiven of sins and to live faithfully for God. But I can see how many of us, of course, once held dear to our emotional religious worldviews and how we created it to our own image. So, yeah, I mean, that's about all I have. Read an article from our friends over at apologeticspress.org in regards to Hinduism. I learned a bunch of stuff. I hope you did as well. Though, again, I know it's a bit tedious or whatnot, but we learned a bunch of stuff. The origins or lack thereof, and how they were called Hindus, and how they went from a monotheistic religious worldview, which was, of course, based or kind of simulated from Jehovah and the one God, and then they kind of just evolved, progressed into this kind of pluralistic, this polyistic, many gods worldview. But for anyone, of course, who would have been born and raised in Hinduism, who was truly seeking reality, seeking truth, to set them free, their mind free, their spirit free, the Christ is and will always be the one true God, the living God, that sets us free from the bondage of Buddhism and Hinduism and Islam and denominationalism and all kinds of false religious worldview. It sets us free from all of that. And we approach it with a very humble and reverent way. We need His grace. We need His love. We need to be forgiven. And Christ, of course, is made available to that. The difference, of course, with Christ, the pure Christ of the Scriptures, and all these other religious worldviews, is that the Christ of the Scriptures can be defended, which I find quite, for someone like me, where I was coming from, I needed evidence. You weren't going to convince me by just because you should. Well, no. Why? Prove to me that the God of the 66 books of the Holy Bible, prove to me that's the real God and not the God of the Hindus or Islam or Buddha or wherever else. Like, prove to me, And lo and behold, there is evidence. And if you follow that, and I'm not going to throw 10, 15, 20 years at you in a session of an hour. You have to do the legwork. You have to kind of I can bring you to the water. I'm not going to make you drink. It's a journey, and it continues to be a learning journey. And I wouldn't see myself doing anything else, really. It's been a blessing to learn religion. It's been a blessing to know pure religion and what is true and what is not. And I'm going to continue to learn the Christian religion, and I will learn about all other religions. But when you go through this journey in life, you truly see what is real and what is not. You discern the difference. Friends, it's been a pleasure to have all of you with us, learning with us. If you find any value in this session, you might want to share it maybe to some friends or whatever on your social media platforms. Please consider doing that. I just got a message a few minutes ago that said it dropped my connection to Facebook. I don't know why it would do that. Maybe I'm still rolling on YouTube or Rumble. I don't know. But anyways, sorry if you were viewing this on Facebook, which apparently told me cut off. I don't know why. But anyways, it's a pleasure to see all of you with us. Truly, it is. And I'll read your comments for sure. Stefan Maya is my name. AddictSouls.com is my website. And I work with the East Coast Church of Christ over here on the East Coast of Canada. East Coast Church of Christ.ca. If you're on the East Coast, we'd love to have you. We're a beautiful, healthy, growing congregation, and it belongs to God. And we're all just trying to help each other make it to heaven here through Jesus Christ. That sound fair? You are appreciated. You are loved. And I want you to stay focused and positive. I know it's difficult these days, no doubt, but we can do it. We can do it. With Jesus, we can do that for sure. Lord willing, we shall see each other again next time. I don't know if I'll be able to go live tomorrow morning. If so, we'll have ourselves a conversation on current events and stuff like that. But if not, I'll see you next week. But in the meantime, in between, if you want to see some of my content, stuff like that, you can certainly follow me on my Facebook page, my personal profile, Stefan Ashmaye. Yeah, I'll see you there. Oh, I upload this stuff on the audio side of things as well on Substack. On Substack, it goes to iTunes and Spotify and Google, Amazon, all those other places as well, in case you want to listen to the audio version of the podcast. Good stuff? All right. God bless.